My mother-in-law tried on my wedding dress without asking and demands to renew her vows in it. I met my husband Luke at a medical conference 6 years ago. He was presenting research. I was there for continuing education credits. We bonded over terrible conference coffee and got married 2 years later. His mother, Beverly, seemed sweet at first. She hugged me when Luke introduced us and said she always wanted a daughter. She took me shopping for my wedding dress and cried when I found the one. It cost me $8,000 that I'd saved for 3 years working night shifts as a respiratory therapist. Beverly kept saying how perfect it was, how it looked like something from a fairy tale. She took hundreds of photos of me in it at the boutique. The wedding was beautiful. Beverly behaved perfectly, gave a lovely speech about gaining a daughter. She even helped me bustle the dress for the reception. I thought I'd won the mother-in-law lottery. After the wedding, I had the dress professionally cleaned and preserved in a special box, kept it in our guest room closet because I'm sentimental like that. Beverly would ask to see it sometimes when she visited. I'd carefully take it out, let her look but not touch because the preservation lady said oils from hands could damage it. Beverly would stare at it like it was made of diamonds. 3 years passed normally. Beverly was involved but not overbearing. She'd babysit our daughter Lily, bring dinner when I worked late, normal grandmother stuff. Then last year, Beverly and Luke's father decided to renew their vows for their 35th anniversary. She became obsessed with making it bigger than their original wedding. She hired a planner, booked a country club, invited 300 people. She kept saying she wanted to fix all the mistakes from her first wedding. The problem started when Beverly couldn't fit into her original dress. She'd kept it all these years but gained weight like most people do over 35 years. She tried 3 different seamstresses. Nobody could make it work without completely destroying the dress. She went on a crash diet, lost 15 pounds, still couldn't zip it. She bought 4 different new dresses but returned them all. Nothing was right. Too modern, too simple, too flashy, wrong shade of white. She was having meltdowns daily, calling Luke crying about how the renewal was ruined. 2 weeks before the renewal, I came home from a 12-hour shift. Luke was at work, Lily was at daycare. I heard noise upstairs, which was weird. Found Beverly in my bedroom, wearing my wedding dress. She'd taken it out of the preservation box with her bare hands, didn't even wear the gloves that came with it. She was admiring herself in my full-length mirror, had even put on my veil and shoes. I just stood there in shock. She turned around and smiled like nothing was wrong, said she was just trying it on to see if it would work for her renewal, that we were basically the same size so it made sense, that the dress was just sitting there unused anyway. I told her to take it off immediately. She said I was being selfish, that it was just fabric, that family shares things. She actually used the words just fabric about my $8,000 dress that I'd worn exactly once on the most important day of my life. I said absolutely not. She could not wear my wedding dress to her renewal. Beverly's face changed completely. She said I owed her for accepting me into the family, that Luke could have married anyone but chose me, and she supported it. That lending her the dress was the least I could do. She started listing everything she'd ever done for us. Babysitting Lily, the birthday gifts, the time she brought soup when I had the flu. Like basic kindness was a debt I had to repay with my wedding dress. I pulled out my phone and called Luke, told him to come home immediately. Beverly stood there in my dress the entire 20 minutes it took him to arrive. She kept modeling it in the mirror, talking about what alterations she'd make, how she'd add sleeves, shorten the train, maybe dye it ivory since pure white was too bridal. She was planning to destroy my dress while wearing it. Luke walked in and his face went white. He told his mother to take off the dress now. Beverly started crying, saying we were ganging up on her, that she just wanted to feel special at her renewal. Luke said she could feel special in a different dress, the one that wasn't his wife's. Beverly took off the dress right there in our bedroom, down to her underwear, threw it on our bed, and stormed out. She called Luke that night, disinviting us from the renewal. Said we'd ruined her special day over a stupid dress. Luke said perfect. We didn't want to come anyway. But just when we thought everything was finally over, we came home one evening to find the door kicked in and the house torn apart. The worst part was realizing the thief didn't take random things. They took my wedding dress. I walked through the front door first and saw it right away. The guest room closet door hung open, the white preservation box nowhere in sight. My jewelry box sat untouched on the dresser, all my grandmother's rings still inside. Luke's watch collection remained in its case on his nightstand. The laptop sat on the desk, the TV mounted on the wall. But the spot where my wedding dress box always lived was completely empty. I sank down on the floor between our overturned chairs and scattered belongings, trying to make sense of someone breaking in just to take that one thing. Luke came home 20 minutes later and found me sitting there staring at nothing. He asked what happened and I pointed at the empty closet space. His face went white. We both knew. The police were already on their way because our neighbor had called about the kicked-in door, but we already knew exactly who had done this. Detective Bianca Lowe showed up 40 minutes after the first patrol officers secured the scene. She was maybe 40, with her dark hair pulled back tight and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She walked through every room with a camera and notebook, photographing the splintered door frame, the broken window in the back, the pry marks on the closet. She kept stopping and looking at what was still there. My diamond earrings from our anniversary, Luke's Rolex from his father, our daughter Lily's iPad on the coffee table, the flat-screen TV, She came back to the bedroom and asked if anything was actually missing. I told her just the wedding dress from that box that used to be right there. She wrote that down and looked up at me with this expression like she was trying to figure out if I was serious. Luke stepped closer and explained it was an $8,000 dress, professionally preserved, irreplaceable. Bianca asked if we had any idea who might want it specifically. Luke and I looked at each other for a long moment. Then I told her about his mother Beverly trying it on 2 days ago without permission and demanding to wear it to her vow renewal. Bianca sat down at our kitchen table and took detailed notes while I explained the whole thing. Beverly's obsession with finding the perfect dress for her renewal. Her trying on mine in my bedroom while I was at work. The confrontation when Luke came home. How she'd stripped it off and thrown it on our bed before storming out. How she'd disinvited us from the renewal that night. Bianca wrote it all down and said the selective theft combined with the recent conflict made Beverly a clear person of interest. But she needed evidence before approaching her. She couldn't just show up and accuse someone's mother-in-law of burglary without proof. Luke pulled out his phone with shaking hands and called his dad William. He tried to sound casual, but his voice cracked when he asked if Beverly had brought home any large packages or boxes recently. We all sat there listening to the phone on speaker. William sounded confused and tired. He said Beverly had locked herself in the guest room 2 days ago and wouldn't come out or talk to him about the renewal anymore. He'd been sleeping in their bedroom alone and leaving food outside the guest room door. Luke asked if he could check the guest room for a large white box, maybe 2 feet by 3 feet. William went quiet for a second and then agreed, but asked what this was about. Luke said he'd explain everything, but please just check the room first. We heard William walking upstairs, his footsteps heavy on the wood floors. He knocked on the door and called Beverly's name. No answer. He knocked again. Still nothing. Then we heard a key in a lock and a door opening. William made this sharp, gasping sound that made my stomach drop. William's voice came back shaky and wrong. He said the wedding dress was hanging on the back of the guest room door in a garment bag. There was a tag attached to it from the country club where the vow renewal was supposed to happen. He kept asking what was going on. Why did Beverly have Kayla's dress? How did it get there? Luke told him to leave everything exactly where it was, and not to touch anything because the police were coming. We heard William sink down onto something. Maybe the bed, and his breathing got loud through the phone. He asked if Beverly had stolen the dress. Luke said yes. She'd broken into our house and taken it. William went completely silent for almost a minute. Then he said he needed to sit down even though he already was sitting. Beverly's voice came through the phone in the background. We heard the front door open and her calling out to William. William stood up and we heard him walking, his phone still connected. He said out loud that the dress was hanging right there. What had she done? Beverly's voice got closer and immediately defensive. She said she was just borrowing it. She'd planned to return it after the renewal. It wasn't a big deal. William's voice got loud in a way Luke said he'd never heard before. He told Beverly that she'd broken into their son's house and stolen from their daughter-in-law. Beverly's pitch went up and shrill. She insisted she had a right to the dress after everything she'd done for us. All the babysitting and the gifts and the support. William told her the police were coming because what she did was a crime. Beverly started yelling that we were being dramatic and cruel, that family shares things, that the dress was just sitting there unused anyway. Bianca called for another officer and they left for Beverly and William's house while Luke and I stayed home like she'd asked. I sat on the couch with Luke holding my hand. His palm was sweaty and cold. His face had gone pale and drawn, all the color drained out. He kept saying he was sorry over and over. I told him this wasn't his fault, but he just shook his head and stared at the wall. We waited like that for an hour, not talking, barely moving. My phone buzzed with a text from Lily's daycare asking about pickup, and I realized we'd forgotten our daughter in all this chaos. Luke went to get her while I waited. Bianca called right after he left. She said they'd recovered the dress and arrested Beverly for burglary, criminal mischief, and theft. Beverly was processed at the station. I could pick up the dress after they finished documenting it as evidence. 3 days later, I walked into the police evidence room to retrieve my dress. The preservation box sat on a metal table, crushed and torn on one side. They'd photographed everything from multiple angles, tagged it all with evidence markers. I opened what was left of the box with gloves they gave me. The dress looked wrong immediately. There were visible handprints on the bodice, dark smudges that looked like makeup. The hem had dirt ground into the beading from being dragged across floors. The veil had a tear in it. I took pictures of everything on my phone before carefully folding it all back up. The preservation specialist I called that afternoon said the damage would cost at least $3,000 to properly clean and repair. She said some of the staining might be permanent depending on what the makeup was made of. The dirt might come out, but the beading was definitely scratched. She asked what had happened to it, and I told her my mother-in-law had stolen it to wear to her vow renewal. William called Luke that night crying so hard we could barely understand him. He kept apologizing and saying he had no idea Beverly was capable of something like this. He said he'd canceled the vow renewal completely, and put down payments were just gone, but he didn't care. He was staying at a hotel because he couldn't even look at Beverly right now. Luke tried to comfort his dad while also making it very clear that we were pressing charges and wouldn't be dropping them no matter who asked. William said he understood, and that he supported us completely. He said Beverly needed to face real consequences for once in her life. Luke asked what he meant by that, and William said there had been other incidents over the years, smaller things, but he'd always made excuses for her behavior. Not anymore. Beverly's lawyer called Bianca 2 days after that, trying to arrange a meeting with us. Bianca called to ask if we wanted to hear what they had to say. The lawyer got on the phone and suggested we were overreacting to what she called a family misunderstanding. She said Beverly was sorry and willing to pay for any damage to the dress. I told the lawyer through Bianca that breaking into our home, kicking in our door, terrifying our family, and stealing my property wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a crime. The lawyer's voice got colder and said that family court proceedings would be ugly and public, that our dirty laundry would be aired in front of everyone we knew, that Beverly's entire family would testify about what good people they were. I said I didn't care who testified or what they said. Beverly had committed burglary and she was going to face the legal consequences. The lawyer said we'd regret taking this path and hung up. The phone started ringing within an hour. Luke's aunt was first, leaving a long voicemail about how Beverly clearly needed mental health help instead of criminal charges. She kept saying family should support family through crisis, that we were being cruel and vindictive. Then Luke's cousin called saying his mom was beside herself, that Beverly had always been so good to everyone and didn't deserve this. I listened to Luke take call after call, his face getting more tired with each one. Some relatives supported us completely, saying what Beverly did was wrong no matter what. Others acted like we were destroying the family over a stupid dress. Luke's uncle actually said those words, stupid dress, like the $8,000 and 3 years of savings meant nothing. I took the phone when Luke looked ready to throw it and told his uncle that mental health issues don't excuse breaking into someone's home and stealing their property. That if Beverly was having a crisis, she should have gotten help instead of committing crimes. He hung up on me. Luke sat on the couch with his head in his hands while I blocked 6 more family members who wouldn't stop calling. The next morning, Harold Whitney from our insurance company showed up with a clipboard and camera. He was maybe 60 with gray hair and kind eyes, and he spent 2 hours going through everything. He photographed the kicked-in door from multiple angles, measured the damage, documented the broken window frame. In our bedroom, he looked at the closet where the preservation box had been stored, took notes about the pry marks on the door. I showed him the photos I'd taken of the ruined dress at the police station, and he wrote down every detail about the staining and dirt damage. He explained our homeowner's policy would cover the door repair, window replacement, and closet damage completely. The dress was covered up to $8,000 with proper documentation, which I had from the original purchase and the preservation service. He said the claim would take 3 or 4 weeks to process, but everything looked straightforward. At least we wouldn't be broke on top of everything else. That afternoon, Lily came home from daycare and asked why Grandma Beverly couldn't visit anymore. My stomach dropped because we'd been avoiding this conversation, hoping she wouldn't notice yet. Luke picked her up and sat her on his lap, and I sat next to them trying to figure out what to say. We told her that Grandma Beverly made some bad choices that broke our trust and hurt our family. That sometimes when people make really bad choices, they can't be part of our lives anymore, even if we love them. Lily's face crumpled and she asked if Grandma Beverly didn't love us anymore. Luke's voice cracked when he said that wasn't it, that Grandma Beverly loves us but made choices that weren't safe for our family. Lily started crying, asking why Grandma couldn't just say sorry and fix it like she has to do at the school when she makes mistakes. I tried to explain that some mistakes are too big to fix with just sorry, that adults have harder consequences than kids do. She didn't understand, and honestly, I barely understood it myself. Luke held her while she cried, and I watched tears run down his face too. He kept stroking her hair and promising that Grandpa William still loved her and would visit lots. The arraignment happened 3 days later at the county courthouse. We sat in the gallery while Beverly was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hands in cuffs. She looked terrible, hair unwashed and face puffy from crying. Her lawyer stood next to her while the judge read the charges: burglary in the 2nd degree, criminal mischief, theft of property over $5,000. Beverly pleaded not guilty in this small voice, nothing like her usual confident tone. Her lawyer argued that this was a family dispute being criminalized, that Beverly had previous access to our home and believed she had permission to take the dress. He kept emphasizing the family relationship like that made breaking and entering okay. The prosecutor shut that down fast, pointing out the forced entry, the stolen property, and Beverly's own text messages planning the break-in. The judge looked unimpressed with the family dispute argument. She set bail at $10,000 and scheduled the preliminary hearing for 2 weeks out. We waited to see if William would post bail. He didn't. Beverly was led back out still in cuffs, and she looked at Luke with this pleading expression that made my skin crawl. Luke just stared straight ahead until she was gone. William called that night and asked to meet us for coffee the next morning. He looked awful when we sat down, like he'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. His eyes were red and he had this defeated slump to his shoulders. He ordered coffee but didn't drink it, just wrapped his hands around the cup and stared at the table. Then he said he was filing for divorce, that this whole situation had forced him to see patterns he'd been ignoring for decades. Beverly's entitlement, her manipulation, the way she kept score of every kind thing she did like people owed her for basic decency. He said the dress incident was just the final straw in 35 years of controlling behavior. Luke looked devastated, asking if there was any way to work through it. William shook his head and said he was done making excuses for Beverly's choices, that he'd enabled her for too long and watching her break into our home and traumatize our family was the wake-up call he needed. He apologized for not standing up to her sooner, for all the times he'd smoothed things over instead of holding her accountable. Luke cried and William cried, and I sat there feeling guilty that our situation was ending their marriage, even though I knew it wasn't really our fault. My first appointment with Sally Randolph happened that same week. She was recommended by a coworker who'd seen a trauma therapist after a car accident. Sally's office was calm and comfortable. Lots of soft lighting and plants. She let me talk for the whole first session, just processing everything that had happened. I told her about trusting Beverly completely, welcoming her into my life and my home, treating her like the mother I'd always wanted. And she repaid that trust by literally breaking down my door and stealing something precious to me. Sally said the violation feels deeper when it's family, because the betrayal is layered. It's not just the crime itself, but the shattering of trust and safety with someone who was supposed to love and protect you. We talked about how I'd given Beverly access to my home, my daughter, my private spaces because I trusted her, and she used that access to plan a crime against me. Sally said that kind of betrayal takes time to process and heal from, that it was normal to feel angry and violated and confused all at once. I left feeling slightly less crazy for having such strong reactions to what some family members kept calling just a dress. Beverly's sister called my cell phone directly 2 days before the preliminary hearing. I didn't recognize the number, so I answered, and she immediately started demanding I drop the charges. Her voice was sharp and accusing, saying I was being vindictive and cruel, that Beverly made a mistake but didn't deserve to have a criminal record and go to prison. I told her that breaking into someone's home isn't a mistake, it's a choice. That Beverly knew exactly what she was doing when she kicked in our door and stole my property. She said I was tearing the family apart, that everyone was taking sides and relationships were being destroyed. I pointed out that Beverly tore the family apart when she decided her wants mattered more than our safety and trust, that I didn't make her commit crimes. She chose to do that herself. Beverly's sister called me selfish and said I'd regret this when Beverly got out and the family never forgave me. I hung up and blocked her number. The preliminary hearing happened on a Tuesday morning. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with maybe 20 seats in the gallery. Raphael Carson, Beverly and William's neighbor, testified first. He was in his 70s, retired, very straightforward and honest. He said he'd seen Beverly loading a large white box into her car around 7 in the evening on the day of the break-in. He remembered it specifically because she was acting nervous and rushed, kept looking around like she didn't want anyone to see her. He'd waved and she'd jumped, then hurried into her car and drove off quickly. Beverly's lawyer tried to suggest he was mistaken about the date, or that it could have been any white box. Raphael was firm that he remembered clearly because his wife had commented on Beverly's strange behavior at dinner that night. The prosecutor asked if Beverly normally acted nervous or rushed when he saw her, and Raphael said no. She was usually very friendly and chatty. This was completely different from her normal behavior. Anya Tolbert testified next, presenting the crime scene evidence with photos and documentation. She was maybe 40, professional and precise in her testimony. She explained that the door had been kicked in with significant force, leaving boot prints and splintered wood. The window was broken from outside with a rock found in our bedroom. There were pry marks on our bedroom closet door where someone had forced it open with a tool, probably a screwdriver based on the markings. She walked through each piece of evidence methodically, showing this was clearly intentional forced entry, and not someone who had a key letting themselves in. The damage patterns showed someone breaking in who didn't have permission or access. Beverly's lawyer tried to argue the door could have been damaged previously, but Anya shut that down by showing the fresh wood splinters and new damage patterns. Everything was consistent with a break-in that happened on the specific date we reported it. After the hearing, Sally warned me that Beverly's lawyer would probably shift to an insanity defense. She said it was a common tactic when the evidence was overwhelming, suggesting the defendant had a mental breakdown and wasn't responsible for their actions. But Sally pointed out that actual mental health crises don't usually involve this level of planning and calculated behavior. The prosecution agreed, saying Beverly's text messages showed clear planning over multiple days. This wasn't an impulsive act during a breakdown. It was premeditated burglary. The trial date came 3 weeks after the preliminary hearing, and the courtroom was packed with more people than I expected. Luke took the stand first, and the prosecutor asked him to describe finding Beverly in our bedroom wearing my wedding dress. He explained how he'd come home to my call and walked in to see his mother modeling the dress in our mirror, talking about alterations she wanted to make. His voice stayed steady, but I could see his hands shaking slightly as he gripped the witness stand. The prosecutor asked what Beverly said when he told her to take it off, and Luke recounted her listing everything she'd ever done for us like we owed her a debt. He said she'd acted entitled to the dress, like our property was hers to take because she was family. Beverly's lawyer tried to suggest Luke was exaggerating his mother's behavior, but Luke stood firm on every detail. The judge took notes the entire time, and her expression stayed neutral but focused. When the prosecutor asked if Beverly had ever returned our house key after that incident, Luke said no. We'd had to change all our locks because we didn't trust her anymore. Beverly sat at the defense table staring at Luke with this hurt expression, but he wouldn't look at her. The prosecutor finished, and Beverly's lawyer declined to cross-examine, which seemed like a smart choice given how solid Luke's testimony was. I took the stand next, and my hands were sweating so badly I had to wipe them on my skirt before placing my hand on the Bible. The prosecutor asked me to explain the process of buying the wedding dress, and I walked through the 3 years of saving money from night shift differentials. I told the court about the $8,000 price tag and how the preservation specialist had explained the careful handling required to prevent damage. The prosecutor asked what the dress meant to me beyond its monetary value, and I explained it represented one of the happiest days of my life, the day I married Luke and started our family. I said the preservation wasn't about keeping fabric in a box. It was about preserving a memory I wanted to share with my daughter someday. Beverly stared at me the entire time I testified with this cold, flat expression that made my skin crawl. There was no remorse in her eyes, no understanding of why what she'd done hurt so much. The prosecutor asked if I'd given Beverly permission to take the dress, and I said absolutely not, that I'd explicitly told her she couldn't use it for her vow renewal. Beverly's lawyer asked me if I'd ever considered lending the dress to family members, and I said no, because it was preserved and meant to stay that way. He asked if I thought I was being selfish by refusing to share, and I said no. I thought I was protecting my property and my memories. The judge thanked me, and I stepped down, my legs shaky from adrenaline. The prosecution called their technology expert next, a woman who'd analyzed Beverly's phone records under warrant. She presented text messages Beverly had sent to herself in the days before the break-in, apparently using her notes app to plan. The messages showed searches for locksmiths in our area, screenshots of our work schedules she'd found on social media, and a mapped route from her house to ours with estimated drive times. The expert explained that Beverly had been researching our schedules for at least 3 days, noting when we'd both be at work and Lily would be at daycare. She'd looked up how to force open a door without leaving obvious tool marks, and had searched for information about home security systems. The prosecutor asked if this showed planning and intent, and the expert said yes, this was clearly premeditated activity, not an impulsive decision. Beverly's lawyer tried to suggest these were innocent searches. Maybe Beverly was concerned about our home security, but the expert pointed out the timing immediately before the break-in made that unlikely. The judge allowed the text messages and search history into evidence over the defense's objection. Beverly took the stand in her own defense, and I could tell immediately it was a mistake. Her lawyer asked her to explain why she took the dress, and Beverly launched into this long explanation about paying for part of our wedding flowers. She said she'd contributed to the wedding planning and helped me find the dress, so she felt she had some claim to it. The prosecutor objected to relevance, and the judge sustained it, telling Beverly to answer the specific question. Beverly said she took the dress because she needed it for her vow renewal, and I was being unreasonable by refusing to share. She actually said the words, "I have more right to that dress than she does because I'm the mother of the groom, and she's just the bride." The courtroom went completely silent, and I saw the judge's eyebrows go up. Beverly's lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The prosecutor asked if Beverly understood that breaking into our home was illegal regardless of her feelings about the dress, and Beverly said she didn't think of it as breaking in because she was family. She said family members should have access to each other's homes and property, that we were wrong to change the locks and shut her out. The judge's expression made clear this testimony was going very badly for Beverly. Beverly's lawyer tried to salvage things by asking about her emotional state during the vow renewal planning. Beverly immediately started crying, talking about how she'd felt old and invisible, how the renewal was supposed to be her chance to feel special and beautiful again. She said she'd been desperate and not thinking clearly, that the stress of planning had overwhelmed her. It was a calculated performance, and I could see she'd practiced this part with her lawyer. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue and talked about feeling like her youth was gone, like this was her last chance to have the perfect wedding day she'd missed the first time. The prosecutor objected to the relevance of Beverly's feelings to the criminal charges, and the judge sustained it again. Beverly's lawyer asked if she regretted her actions, and Beverly said she regretted that we'd overreacted and refused to understand her needs. Not that she regretted breaking into our home or stealing my property, but that we'd made such a big deal about it. The judge's face showed exactly what she thought of that answer. The judge called a 15-minute recess, and when she returned, her decision was ready. She said she'd considered all the evidence and testimony carefully, and she found Beverly guilty of burglary in the second degree, criminal mischief, and theft. She rejected the mental health defense entirely, stating that Beverly's actions showed clear planning and intent over multiple days. The judge said that family relationships don't grant permission to break into homes and steal property, and that Beverly's sense of entitlement didn't excuse criminal behavior. She noted that Beverly had shown no genuine remorse, only anger at being held accountable. Beverly's face went white, and her lawyer immediately stood to request a sentencing hearing. The judge scheduled sentencing for 3 weeks later and set a higher bail amount, which Beverly's lawyer said they'd need time to arrange. Court was adjourned, and Beverly was let out by the bailiff, still looking shocked that she'd actually been found guilty. Luke and I met William in the hallway outside the courtroom, and he looked exhausted. He pulled Luke aside and said quietly that he wouldn't be helping with appeal costs, that Beverly needed to face real consequences for once in her life. Luke's relief was visible, his shoulders dropping like a weight had been lifted. William said he was done enabling Beverly's behavior and making excuses for her actions. He'd already filed for divorce and was moving forward with his life without her. The three of us went to get coffee, and William apologized again for not seeing Beverly's patterns sooner, for not standing up to her before things got this bad. Luke told his dad it wasn't his fault, that Beverly had been good at hiding her worst behavior and manipulating situations. The 3 weeks before sentencing were tense and exhausting. Beverly's sister called me 6 times before I blocked her number, leaving voicemails about forgiveness and family unity. Beverly's brother sent a long email about how we were destroying the family over a material possession, completely missing the point about the break-in and violation. Luke's cousin tried the angry approach, texting that we'd ruined Beverly's life and we'd regret this when she got out of prison. We blocked numbers systematically, refusing to engage with anyone who couldn't respect our boundaries. Some family members sent letters to our house, which we threw away without reading. The manipulation attempts were constant and exhausting, but we stayed firm. Luke talked to his therapist about the guilt he felt over family members blaming him, and she helped him understand that their reactions weren't his responsibility. The pre-sentencing report arrived at the courthouse 2 weeks after the conviction. William had been interviewed extensively, and he'd provided examples of Beverly's boundary violations going back decades. She'd taken his mother's jewelry without asking and refused to return it. She'd let herself into his sister's house repeatedly after being told not to. She'd thrown tantrums at family gatherings when she didn't get her way, and everyone had learned to just give in to avoid the drama. The probation officer's report noted a clear pattern of entitlement and disrespect for others' property and boundaries. Beverly had apparently told the probation officer that she was the real victim, that her family had turned against her unfairly. The report recommended prison time rather than probation, citing Beverly's lack of insight and high risk of reoffending. The sentencing hearing was on a Thursday morning, and the courtroom was less crowded this time. The judge reviewed Beverly's pre-sentencing report and the victim impact statements Luke and I had submitted. She noted Beverly's age and lack of prior criminal record, but emphasized the seriousness of the home invasion and betrayal of family trust. The judge said that Beverly's actions weren't a momentary lapse in judgment, but a planned criminal act that violated her son's family in their own home. She sentenced Beverly to 2 years in prison with possibility of parole after 1 year, plus full restitution for the door, window, and dress damage. Beverly would also be required to complete counseling focusing on boundaries and entitlement. The judge said she hoped Beverly would use her time in prison to reflect on her actions and develop genuine remorse. Beverly's face went completely white and she started screaming that this was unfair, that we'd destroyed her life over a stupid dress. She yelled that she'd given us everything and we'd repaid her with betrayal. The bailiff had to physically restrain her as she continued screaming about the injustice. Beverly's lawyer tried to calm her down, but she was beyond reason, still yelling as she was led out of the courtroom. Luke sat next to me with tears running down his face, watching his mother be taken away to prison. The bailiff grabbed Beverly's arm as she continued screaming about injustice and betrayal. She twisted around trying to look back at us, her face red and furious, yelling that we'd pay for this someday. The courtroom doors closed behind her, and the sound of her voice finally faded. Luke collapsed into the bench behind us, his whole body shaking with sobs. I sat next to him and put my arm around his shoulders while he cried into his hands. William came over and sat on Luke's other side, pulling his son into a hug. He told Luke he was sorry it came to this, that he never imagined Beverly would take things this far. William said maybe prison would finally make Beverly understand that actions have consequences, though his voice sounded doubtful. We sat there for 20 minutes while Luke pulled himself together, other people from the courtroom walking past us to their own cases. The prosecutor stopped by and told us the restitution paperwork would be processed within a few weeks. She said we did the right thing by not backing down, that people like Beverly need firm boundaries or they never stop. Luke nodded but couldn't speak yet, his face still wet with tears. We finally left the courthouse and drove home in silence, Luke staring out the window the whole way. That night, he barely ate dinner and went to bed early, exhausted from the emotional weight of watching his mother go to prison. 2 weeks later, a check from our insurance company arrived in the mail for $8,000, plus the cost of the damaged door and window. I called the wedding dress preservation specialist who'd done the original work and explained what happened. She gave me the name of someone who specialized in restoring damaged gowns, a woman who worked out of her home studio across town. I made an appointment and brought the dress in its ruined state, the makeup stains visible on the white fabric and dirt ground into the hem. The specialist examined it carefully under special lighting, pointing out where Beverly's hands had left oil marks on the delicate beading. She said she could remove most of the stains using techniques designed for antique textiles and repair the torn hem with nearly invisible stitching. The work would take 6 weeks and cost $3,000, but she was confident she could restore it to near original condition. I authorized the work and left the dress with her, feeling strange about letting it out of my sight again after everything that happened. The specialist called me every 2 weeks with updates on the restoration progress. She'd successfully removed the makeup stains and most of the oil marks, though some faint discoloration remained visible up close. The hem repair was going well, and would be completely invisible from normal viewing distance. When I picked up the dress 8 weeks later, it looked almost like it had before Beverly touched it. Almost, but not quite. The faint marks reminded me that nothing about my wedding day felt pure anymore. The memories now tied to betrayal and criminal charges and family destruction. I started seeing Sally twice a week instead of once because the feelings about Beverly going to prison were more complicated than I expected. Part of me felt guilty watching Luke suffer over losing his mother, even though I knew she brought this on herself. Part of me felt angry that Beverly's actions forced us into a position where prison was the only option. Sally helped me work through the guilt by reminding me that I didn't put Beverly in prison. Beverly put herself there by breaking into our home. She pointed out that feeling bad for the consequences someone faces doesn't mean you were wrong to hold them accountable. We talked about how I can't control Beverly's choices, only my own responses, and that setting firm boundaries was necessary for my family's safety. Sally asked how I felt about Beverly being locked up, and I admitted it felt safer knowing she couldn't show up at our house. That safety felt wrong to admit out loud, like I was a bad person for being relieved my mother-in-law was in prison. Sally said that was a normal response to someone who'd violated my home and trust so completely. She helped me understand that I could feel sad about the situation while still knowing it was the right outcome. The guilt didn't disappear, but it became more manageable, something I could acknowledge without letting it control my decisions. Luke started his own therapy 3 weeks after the sentencing because he was struggling to function at work. His therapist was a man who specialized in family trauma and helping people process complicated grief. Luke told me after his first session that talking about his mother felt like betraying her, even though she'd committed a crime against us. He struggled with guilt about testifying against Beverly at trial, wondering if there was something he could have done differently to prevent all this. His therapist helped him understand that Beverly's behavior patterns were established long before the dress incident, going back to his childhood. Luke started recognizing ways his mother had manipulated him over the years, making him responsible for managing her emotions and meeting her needs. The therapist pointed out that protecting his wife and daughter was the right choice, that Luke had to choose between enabling his mother's behavior or setting boundaries. Luke came home from therapy sessions looking exhausted but lighter somehow, like he was putting down weight he'd been carrying for years. He told me one night that he wished he'd stood up to his mother sooner, before it got to the point of criminal charges. I reminded him that he couldn't have known how far Beverly would go, that none of us saw the break-in coming. Lily adjusted to Beverly's absence more easily than we expected, which made me sad about what that said about their relationship. She asked where Grandma Beverly was a few times in the first month, and we told her Grandma had to go away for a while because she made bad choices. Lily accepted this explanation and went back to playing with her toys, not asking follow-up questions. She mentioned Beverly occasionally over the next few months, but didn't seem to miss the visits much. I realized that Beverly's time with Lily had always been more about Beverly's needs than Lily's, more about being seen as a devoted grandmother than actually connecting with her granddaughter. William started coming over every weekend to spend time with Lily, taking her to the park and helping with bedtime stories. He was patient and attentive in ways Beverly never had been, actually listening when Lily talked instead of redirecting conversations to himself. Lily started calling him Grandpa and asking when he was coming over next, clearly enjoying the attention. William brought age-appropriate books and toys instead of Beverly's expensive gifts that were more about impressing us than pleasing Lily. The relationship between William and our family grew healthier and more genuine without Beverly's manipulation in the middle. Luke commented one night that his dad was finally the grandfather he'd always hoped Lily would have. 3 months after Beverly's sentencing, a letter arrived with a return address from the Women's Correctional Facility. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it, not sure I wanted to read whatever was inside. The letter was 2 pages long in Beverly's handwriting, apparently written at the encouragement of her prison counselor. Most of it was justifications about how the vow renewal stress had overwhelmed her, and how she'd always been there for us when we needed help. She listed examples of times she'd babysat Lily or brought us dinner, like we owed her unlimited access to our belongings in exchange for basic family kindness. Near the end was one sentence about being sorry we felt hurt by her actions, not sorry for the actions themselves. There was no acknowledgement that breaking into our home was wrong, no understanding of why having family violate our space was so traumatic. The letter ended with Beverly saying she hoped we'd visit her soon so we could work things out as a family. I read it twice looking for any sign of genuine remorse or insight into what she'd done wrong. Nothing. Just self-pity and manipulation wrapped in therapy language. I walked to the kitchen and threw the letter in the trash without responding, not willing to engage with Beverly's continued refusal to take responsibility. Luke asked what was in the letter, and I told him it was more of the same justifications and victim mentality. He nodded and said he wasn't surprised, that his mother had never apologized for anything in his entire life, without adding qualifiers about how she'd been provoked or misunderstood. 6 months after Beverly's sentencing, William's divorce was finalized. He came over to tell us in person, looking both sad and relieved. The divorce had gone through relatively quickly since Beverly was in prison, and couldn't drag out the proceedings. William split their assets according to state law, but made clear he wanted nothing to do with Beverly after her release. He told Luke that he'd wasted 35 years on someone who only cared about herself, and he wasn't wasting whatever time he had left. Luke asked if his dad was okay, and William said he was better than he'd been in decades, that living without Beverly's constant demands and drama felt like breathing fresh air. William had moved into a smaller house closer to us, and was dating a woman named Margaret he'd met through a hiking group. He seemed younger somehow, less worn down, finally able to make choices based on what he wanted instead of what would keep Beverly calm. William said he felt guilty about not leaving Beverly years ago, that maybe if he'd stood up to her sooner she wouldn't have escalated to criminal behavior. Luke and I both told him that Beverly's choices were her own, that staying in a marriage doesn't make you responsible for your spouse breaking the law. William nodded, but I could tell he was still processing decades of enabling behavior and wondering what his life might have looked like if he'd set boundaries earlier. 1 year after Beverly's sentencing, we received notification that she was coming up for parole consideration. The letter explained that we could submit victim impact statements to the parole board, describing how the crime had affected us. I sat down and wrote 3 pages about the ongoing anxiety I felt in my own home, how I checked the locks multiple times every night and woke up at small noises. I detailed the therapy costs and the time off work for court proceedings and the strain on family relationships. I explained that the dress restoration had removed most visible damage, but couldn't erase the violation of having someone break into my home and steal something irreplaceable. Luke wrote his own statement about the pain of watching his mother choose her desires over her son's family and feeling forced to choose between his wife and his mother. He described the guilt he carried about testifying against Beverly and the therapy he needed to process losing his mother to her own criminal behavior. He wrote about explaining to his daughter why her grandmother couldn't visit anymore, and the complicated grief of mourning someone who was still alive, but had destroyed the relationship through her own actions. We submitted both statements to the parole board, along with letters from Sally and Luke's therapist, describing the ongoing impact of Beverly's crime. The parole hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later, but we weren't required to attend, just notified of the outcome. The parole board's decision came in the mail 2 weeks after the hearing. Beverly's request for early release was denied. The letter explained that the board considered her lack of genuine remorse and her failure to take responsibility in her prison counseling sessions. Her counselor's report apparently noted that Beverly still believed she was justified in taking the dress, and that we had overreacted by pressing charges. The report described Beverly as resistant to examining her behavior patterns and unwilling to acknowledge how her actions had harmed others. The parole board determined she posed a risk of reoffending if released early, and would serve her full 2-year sentence. After release, she'd be on strict probation with conditions including no contact with our family and mandatory continued counseling. I felt relieved reading the decision, grateful for more time before having to worry about Beverly being free in the world again. Luke read the letter and said his mother was wasting her time in prison by refusing to do the work of understanding why she was there. He said Beverly would probably leave prison in a year still believing she was the victim, still entitled to whatever she wanted regardless of who it hurt. We decided to move to a new house in a different neighborhood 2 months after the parole denial. The break-in had left our home feeling tainted somehow, the memories of finding everything ransacked too strong to fully overcome. We found a place 15 minutes away with a bigger backyard and better security system, cameras covering all the entrances and motion sensor lights around the perimeter. Lily was excited about the bigger yard and the playground equipment the previous owners had left behind. Luke and I walked through the new house during the final inspection, and I felt something loosen in my chest, a tension I'd been carrying since the day I found Beverly wearing my dress. The new place felt like a fresh start without erasing what we'd been through, a chance to build new memories that weren't connected to betrayal and violation. We moved in over a weekend with help from William and some friends from work. I hung the restored wedding dress in the master bedroom closet of the new house, visible but protected, a reminder of both joy and survival. Luke put his arm around me as we stood looking at it and said we'd gotten through the worst thing he could imagine and come out stronger. The new house felt safer and lighter somehow, like we were finally able to move forward instead of just surviving each day. Lily ran through the rooms claiming her new bedroom and asking when we could get a dog now that we had a yard. We told her we'd think about it, both of us smiling at her excitement about this new chapter of our lives. Luke came home from work 3 weeks after we moved in and told me his supervisor had offered him a promotion to senior research coordinator. The position meant better pay and more responsibility, but it also required traveling to conferences and research sites about once a month for 3 or 4 days at a time. He sat down at the kitchen table and asked if I was comfortable with that, if the idea of being alone overnight made me anxious. I thought about it honestly and told him the new security system helped a lot, and Sally had been working with me on managing the anxiety that still popped up sometimes when I heard unexpected noises. We talked through different options and decided to try it with William staying over the first few times Luke traveled, just until I felt more confident being alone. Luke accepted the promotion the next day, and his first trip was scheduled for 6 weeks out, giving me time to prepare mentally. Sally suggested I find a support group for people who'd experienced violations by family members, saying it might help to connect with others who understood that specific kind of betrayal. I found one that met Tuesday evenings at a community center downtown and went to my first meeting 2 weeks later. There were 8 people in the circle that night, all different ages and backgrounds but connected by the same thread of family causing harm. One woman talked about her sister stealing her identity and racking up $30,000 in credit card debt in her name. Another man described his brother vandalizing his business after a disagreement about their father's estate. A younger woman shared how her mother had sabotaged her wedding by calling the venue and canceling everything 2 days before the ceremony. We all sat there sharing these stories of people who were supposed to love us choosing to hurt us instead, and nobody tried to push forgiveness or suggest we should give them another chance. The group leader emphasized understanding and validation, acknowledging the complicated grief of losing family relationships to their own destructive choices. I left that first meeting feeling less alone in what had happened with Beverly, understanding that family betrayal was its own specific kind of trauma that people outside it didn't always understand. Beverly was released from prison 18 months after we moved into the new house, having served her full 2-year sentence. William called Luke to let him know she was out, and that her probation conditions included no contact with our family and mandatory continued counseling for the next 3 years. He told us Beverly was living in a small one-bedroom apartment across town and working at a retail store in the mall. William made it clear he had no contact with her and didn't plan to, having built a new life that was much happier without her manipulation and drama. Luke asked if his dad was doing okay with everything, and William said he felt lighter than he had in decades, like he could finally breathe without worrying about Beverly's next outburst or demand. The formal letter from Beverly's probation officer arrived in our mailbox 4 days after her release. It outlined the no-contact order in specific legal language, stating that Beverly was prohibited from any direct or indirect contact with me, Luke, or Lily. The letter provided instructions for reporting violations, including a direct phone number for the probation officer and clear documentation requirements. Reading through the official language made everything feel final in a way that was actually comforting, knowing there were real legal consequences now if Beverly tried to insert herself back into our lives. That boundary felt protective rather than punitive, a wall we could rely on to keep us safe. Lily was 6 years old now and came home from the school one afternoon, asking why she only had one grandma and one grandpa when her friends had more. She'd been comparing family trees in class and noticed other kids had 4 grandparents, while she only saw William and my mom regularly. Luke and I sat down with her and explained in simple terms that Grandma Beverly had made choices that weren't safe for our family, so she couldn't be part of our lives anymore. Lily thought about this for a minute, then asked if Grandma Beverly had been mean to us. We told her yes, in a way that hurt our family, and that sometimes people can't change even when we want them to. Lily accepted this with the matter-of-fact resilience that kids have, and went back to playing with her dolls, the conversation apparently resolved in her mind. Our 7th wedding anniversary fell on a Saturday in June, and Luke and I decided to celebrate with a small ceremony where I would wear the restored wedding dress. It felt important to reclaim the dress and create a new positive memory with it, instead of letting Beverly's actions define what it meant. We planned everything for our backyard with just close family and friends, wanting to mark this milestone in our marriage. William came over the morning of the ceremony and helped Luke set up chairs and string lights across the patio. I got ready upstairs with my best friend helping me into the dress, and looking at myself in the mirror felt different this time. The dress represented survival now, not just the joy of our wedding day, but everything we'd overcome together. William teared up when he saw us standing together in the backyard, and he told Luke and me that this was what real love looked like, choosing each other through difficult times and coming out stronger. The ceremony stayed small and private. Just us, Lily, William, and a few close friends who'd supported us through everything with Beverly. We'd written new vows about choosing each other through difficult times and building a family based on respect and healthy boundaries. Luke promised to always prioritize our immediate family and protect the peace we'd worked so hard to create. I promised to trust him and continue working on my own healing so our marriage could thrive. Lily stood between us holding a basket of flower petals, and when we kissed at the end, she threw them in the air laughing. The whole thing felt healing in a way I hadn't expected, celebrating our marriage in a way that Beverly couldn't touch or taint with her presence. Sally told me in one of our final sessions that I'd done the hard work of processing trauma and setting boundaries while still remaining open to love and trust. She pointed out that I didn't let Beverly's actions make me bitter or closed off to other relationships. I'd protected myself while still being vulnerable with people who deserved it, which took real strength and self-awareness. She said many people who experience family betrayal either shut down completely or continue letting toxic people hurt them, but I'd found a middle path of healthy boundaries without hardening my heart. I felt proud of the growth I'd made over the past 2 years, the way I'd learned to trust my instincts and prioritize my family's safety over guilt or obligation. William became an active, involved grandfather to Lily in ways Beverly never had been. He picked her up from the school twice a week and took her to the park, pushing her on the swings and helping her across the monkey bars. He showed up for school events and holiday programs, always in the front row with his phone recording everything. He babysat when Luke and I needed date nights and never made it feel like an obligation or something we owed him for. Luke told me one night that his dad was finally the father he'd always needed him to be, no longer enabling Beverly's behavior or making excuses for her manipulation. William had found himself again after the divorce, becoming the parent he should have been all along. The notification about Beverly's probation violation arrived by certified mail 6 months after her release. The letter explained that Beverly had attempted to contact Luke's aunt and manipulate her into arranging a meeting with us, violating the no-contact order. Her probation was extended for an additional year, and she received a formal warning that further violations would result in jail time. The probation officer's report included text message screenshots where Beverly had tried to convince the aunt that we were keeping Lily from her unfairly, that she deserved to see her granddaughter. The fact that Beverly still couldn't respect boundaries even after everything, after prison and probation and losing her entire family, showed us we'd made the right choice in maintaining no contact. Some people never learn, never take responsibility, never change no matter what consequences they face. 6 months after the probation violation, my supervisor at the hospital called me into her office and offered me a promotion to lead the respiratory therapy department. The pay increase was significant, enough that Luke and I could finally open a college savings account for Lily and still have money left over each month. I accepted immediately, and spent the next few weeks training on the new administrative responsibilities while still keeping my clinical skills sharp. My colleagues threw me a small celebration in the break room with cake and cards, and several of them mentioned how impressed they were with how I'd handled everything with Beverly. Work became this space where I felt completely capable and valued, where my skills mattered and nobody questioned my judgment or tried to manipulate me. The hospital had clear rules and boundaries, professional respect, and I thrived in that environment after years of navigating Beverly's chaos. Luke and William started going fishing every other Saturday morning, leaving before dawn and coming back around noon smelling like lake water and sunscreen. They'd never had that kind of relationship before because Beverly always inserted herself into their interactions, managing the conversation and steering it away from anything too personal or emotional. Now they sat in a boat for hours with nothing to do but talk, and Luke came home from those trips looking lighter somehow. William apologized one morning while they were baiting hooks, said he was sorry for all the years Luke spent trying to manage Beverly's tantrums and keep the peace. He admitted he should have stood up to her decades ago instead of enabling her behavior and expecting Luke to just deal with it. Luke told me about it that night while we were getting ready for bed, his voice thick with emotion as he described his dad finally acknowledging the burden he'd carried. They talked about Luke's childhood, about times William had stayed quiet when Beverly was being unreasonable, about the relief of not having to protect anyone's feelings anymore. The fishing trips became this tradition, where they could be honest with each other without Beverly's manipulation poisoning everything. 2 years after Beverly got out of prison, Luke's aunt mentioned during a phone call that she'd run into Beverly at a grocery store. Beverly was still working at the same retail job, still living alone in her small apartment across town, and apparently told the aunt that she was the real victim in all this. According to Beverly's version of events, I was a vindictive daughter-in-law who'd turned her son against her over a misunderstanding, and the criminal charges were just my way of punishing her for being too involved in Luke's life. The aunt seemed uncomfortable relaying this information, like she wasn't sure if she should tell us or not. Luke thanked her for letting us know and said we weren't interested in correcting Beverly's narrative or engaging with it in any way. We'd learned that some people will never take responsibility for their actions, will always find a way to paint themselves as the victim no matter how much evidence exists to the contrary. Beverly could tell whatever story she wanted to tell. We weren't going to waste energy fighting it. Lily started second grade and came home one afternoon with a family tree assignment, excited to fill in all the names and draw pictures. We sat at the kitchen table with her that evening helping her map out the branches, and she asked why we weren't including Grandma Beverly, like some of her friends included all their grandparents. Luke and I exchanged a glance, and then I explained gently that some family members aren't part of our lives because they made choices that weren't safe for us. We helped her create a tree that had William prominently featured with multiple branches showing their relationship, and we added a simple note at the bottom that said some relatives aren't included because families come in different shapes. Lily accepted this explanation the way kids do, with straightforward logic that didn't require all the complicated adult emotions behind it. Her teacher called me a few days later to say she'd handled the assignment sensitively and understood that modern families don't always include every biological relative. She mentioned that several kids in the class had similar situations and that Lily shouldn't feel different or strange about it. Luke had to travel to a conference in another state for 3 days, and for the first time since the break-in, I felt completely okay being home alone overnight. The anxiety that used to spike every time I heard a noise after dark had faded over the months of therapy and healing, replaced by confidence in our security system and my own ability to handle whatever came up. I went through my normal evening routine, put Lily to bed, watched some television, and went to sleep without that familiar knot of fear in my stomach. Sally had been right during one of our last sessions when she said trauma doesn't have to define you forever if you do the work to process it. I'd done that work, faced the fear, learned to trust my instincts again, and now I could be alone in my own home without feeling like I was waiting for something terrible to happen. Luke called before bed each night he was gone, and I could honestly tell him I was fine, that I wasn't just saying it to make him feel better about traveling. We hosted Thanksgiving at our house that year with William and my parents and my sister's family, creating new traditions that didn't include Beverly's drama or manipulation. William arrived early to help Luke set up extra tables in the dining room while I worked on the turkey, and my mom brought her famous sweet potato casserole that Lily loved. The day felt relaxed and warm, full of genuine conversation and laughter, without anyone walking on eggshells or managing someone's mood. We ate too much food, played board games with the kids, watched football in the living room, and nobody threw a tantrum or made everything about themselves. I realized while cleaning up that evening that this was what family gatherings were supposed to feel like, people enjoying each other's company without constant tension or the threat of an explosion. My sister pulled me aside while we were washing dishes and said she was proud of how I'd handled everything with Beverly, that setting those boundaries had been the right choice even though it was hard. Luke and I were lying in bed one night a few weeks later when he said something that caught me off guard. He told me he was actually grateful the situation with Beverly had happened before Lily was old enough to form strong memories of her, that watching his mother's entitlement and manipulation as an adult had made him recognize patterns from his childhood that he'd always thought were normal. He described growing up thinking it was his job to manage his mother's emotions, to keep her happy and prevent her meltdowns, and how exhausting that had been. Now he could see it clearly for what it was: emotional manipulation and boundary violations that he'd been trained to accept. He said he was committed to breaking those patterns with Lily, to raising her with healthy boundaries and teaching her that she didn't owe anyone access to her life just because they were related. We talked for over an hour about the kind of parents we wanted to be, the lessons we wanted to teach Lily about respect and consent, and standing up for herself. William started dating a woman named Margaret about 8 months after his divorce was finalized, and he brought her to meet us on a Sunday afternoon. She was kind and warm without being pushy, asked questions about our lives and actually listened to the answers and treated everyone with genuine respect. The contrast to Beverly's manipulation was so stark it was almost funny, watching someone interact with us like normal people instead of chess pieces to be moved around. Margaret brought homemade cookies for Lily and didn't make a big production out of it, just handed them over with a smile, and then got interested in the puzzle Lily was working on. Lily took to her immediately, showing her the playhouse in the backyard and chattering about school and her friends. Luke and I watched them together and felt relieved that William had found someone who appreciated him without trying to control every aspect of his life. Margaret knew about Beverly and the situation, but didn't pry or ask invasive questions, just acknowledged that families could be complicated and left it at that. I took the restored wedding dress out of storage one Saturday morning while Luke was at the hardware store and Lily was at a friend's house. I carefully removed it from the preservation box and held it up to the light, examining the faint stains that were barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. The dress still took my breath away with its detailed beadwork and flowing train, but I could look at it now without that sharp pain of violation I used to feel. It had become something different over the past few years, not just a symbol of my wedding day, but also a reminder of everything we'd survived and overcome. Sally would be proud of how far I'd come in reframing the narrative, in taking back ownership of my own story and my own possessions. The dress was mine. It represented my marriage and my strength, and Beverly's actions couldn't take that away from me permanently. I carefully returned it to storage feeling peaceful instead of angry, ready to keep moving forward. Beverly's probation officer sent us a certified letter 3 years after her original sentencing, informing us that her probation period had officially ended, and the no-contact order was no longer legally enforceable. Our lawyer called the same day the letter arrived and advised us that we should maintain our boundaries regardless of the legal status, and that we should document any contact attempts Beverly might make. Luke and I sat down with Lily that evening and had a family discussion about what this meant, explaining in age-appropriate terms that Grandma Beverly was no longer required by law to stay away from us, but that our family rule remained the same. We decided together that our boundaries stood permanently because our peace and safety mattered more than biology or legal paperwork. Lily understood and agreed, saying she didn't really remember Grandma Beverly much anyway, and she was happy with the family we had. The legal order might have expired, but our commitment to protecting ourselves hadn't changed, and we filed the paperwork away, knowing we'd done everything right. Our 10-year anniversary came up fast, and Luke surprised me with a beach rental 2 hours away, just the two of us for a long weekend. William and Margaret took Lily without hesitation, already planning activities and promising to send photos. We packed light and drove down on a Friday afternoon, windows open and music playing, and it felt like being young again before everything got complicated. The beach house was small but right on the water, and we spent the first evening walking barefoot in the sand, talking about everything we'd been through. Luke stopped at one point and looked at me with this serious expression and said he was grateful every single day that I was his partner, that most marriages wouldn't have survived what Beverly put us through. I squeezed his hand and told him we survived because we chose each other first, always, and that was never going to change. We stayed up late that night on the porch listening to waves and making plans for the future, real plans about Lily's education, and maybe getting a dog and taking more trips like this one. The weekend recharged something in both of us, reminded us that we'd built something strong enough to weather any storm Beverly had thrown at us. 2 weeks after we got back, I was shopping for groceries after work when I saw a woman staring at me from the produce section. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her until she walked over and introduced herself as one of Beverly's old friends from before everything happened. She did this awkward dance around actually saying anything direct, talking about how time changes people and everyone makes mistakes, and how lonely it must be to lose your whole family over misunderstandings. I let her finish, then said very clearly that Beverly's feelings weren't my responsibility, and I hoped she found peace, but it wouldn't be with my family. The woman's face went red and she stammered something about just trying to help, and I told her the best help was respecting our boundaries and not trying to guilt-trip me in the grocery store. She nodded quickly and practically ran away, and I finished my shopping feeling proud that I'd held firm without being cruel or getting pulled into drama. Some people will never understand that forgiveness doesn't mean giving someone access to hurt you again. Lily's 8th birthday party was at a local park with 20 kids running around playing games and eating too much cake. She'd grown into this confident kid who wasn't afraid to speak up when something bothered her, but was also incredibly kind to other people. William and Margaret came early to help set up and stayed late to clean, and watching them interact with Lily made me grateful we'd built this chosen family around her. She understood without us having to explain too much that family meant people who treated you with love and respect, not just biology or obligation. She asked about Beverly maybe once every few months, usually after seeing a friend with their grandmother, and we'd give her the same simple explanation that some people can't be part of our lives because they don't know how to be safe. Lily would nod and accept it and move on to talking about something else, and I was relieved she didn't carry the weight of that loss the way Luke and I had. Our family hit this rhythm of genuine happiness that I didn't take for granted after everything we'd survived. The wedding dress hung in our closet now instead of being locked away in storage, and I could look at it without that sharp pain of violation I used to feel. It represented both the joy of marrying Luke and the strength it took to protect what was ours from someone who thought she had a right to take it. We'd created boundaries that actually held, built a life based on respect and trust, and surrounded ourselves with people who understood that love doesn't come with conditions or debts. Nobody got to violate our peace anymore because we'd learned the hard way to recognize manipulation and shut it down immediately. The life we had now was exactly what we deserved, and I was proud of everything we'd overcome to get here.